We're ready? Are we rolling, recording and broadcasting lines? Well, good morning, everybody. Welcome to the July 12th, 2024 meeting of the Baltimore Regional Transit Commission. I'm the chair, John Laria. Welcome to commissioners who are here in person. We have a number also on, wow, quite a few people online today, which is great, including a number of commissioners. So thank you for taking the time and thanks for being able to do this. I know some people are on travel and so on, and we knew that summer is a daunting time sometimes in Maryland and Baltimore, but I think we wanted to keep the rhythm going. We wanted to have monthly meetings, and I appreciate everybody's commitment to continuing to meet on this regular schedule, because we have a lot of work to do and important time in the various budget cycles and others. So welcome and thank you. I did want to introduce a new member, Trey Dickerson. Trey is from Howard County, appointed by the county executive. The original appointee, Bruce Gardner, went back to his old job as director of the Maryland Transportation Authority, just in time for everything that has happened at MDTA. Bruce is well suited for that job, so we're glad he's there, but we're also glad to have Trey. I'm going to give you a minute, if you wouldn't mind, just tell us who you are and your background. And
sure. Good morning, everyone. I'm happy and thrilled to be here and starting to work with you all. I'm the former deputy director for DPW in Howard County. Before that, I spent about 16 years with the District Department of Transportation, kind of rising through the ranks in traffic engineering, from planning to environmental engineering, and also design construction. So I enjoyed the time I spent in DC, and I'm looking forward to seeing what I can do here in Howard County and the Baltimore region.
Great. Thank you, Trey. Welcome. It's good to have you. Well qualified. Thanks so much. Don, is there anything else we have administratively before we turn to Holly for her administrative update?
No, we will have things in other business, but we'll talk about it.
Okay, very good. Okay, anything from you?
No,
Vice Chair? Okay. All right, Holly, please.
The sheriff should be working on that. All right, good morning, everyone. Before I start on my updates, I did just want to acknowledge, we've had a couple of pretty tragic incidents this week happen on around our transit system that made news. So obviously incredibly tragic situations. Anytime anything like that happens on our transit system, our heart goes out to the victims and their families, and we're working really closely with city and MTA police to make sure that they can do their investigations and the families are supported. We're also working closely. This has a big impact with our employees who witness these things, and so we're working to make sure that they have the appropriate supports that they need to continue to deliver service and make sure that they're feeling okay. I also want to just note, while these things do happen, while they do make news, and it again is incredibly tragic, it's primarily spillover from things that are happening in the region and not necessarily targeted situations on our transit system. I also want to note it's not indicative of a typical transit trip. We do over 200,000 trips every single day. So you hear about one or two incidents that's happened, but by and large, our system continues to be one of the safest systems in the country. The MTA police do a really good job of, when things happen on the system, of making sure that people are caught. We have a close to an 80% clearance rate. We have fantastic partnerships with city police, with county police, and I want to thank all of them for their work to continue to ensure that the system is safe. So I did just want to acknowledge that this happens, it has happened. We're continuing to work with police to make sure that we're targeting enforcement and in the appropriate places, but just wanted to acknowledge that. And if there's any questions on security or anything, I can't get into the specifics of these cases because they're still active investigation, but just did want to acknowledge that.
I just want to say things. Mike McMillan is a union of the president to represent those employees. I will say these most recent incidents, like I said, I was a bus operator for 15 years, a train operator for 7 years. And then even being in my full-time position as union president, the most recent response by MTA's administration and notifying the union, and also the level of support that they've given to those operators involved in the situation, also the passengers. It has been a great response. These incidents, like I said, it's hard to stop them. Nobody can determine where it's coming from. And yes, we have had conversations where it is a spillover from what's happening, in society period right now. And we do feel as though, with the MTA resources that they have, they are responding, and it has been, great communication and help to the operators, and also making awareness to the public as well about the safety on the transit that comes from the riding public. Thank you.
Thanks, Mike.
And we appreciate the support from the union. When we call, we say, hey, can you come out as well? And I think as a whole, just making sure our employees feel supported. I spoke with one of our employees yesterday, making sure she has a therapy appointment, is getting help and access. So we're gonna continue to push that.
Thank you.
Not an easy way to transition, but I'm gonna transition into our normal updates because we have a lot of good stuff happening as well. I'm gonna start, we had the Red Line Mode announcement. Many of you were able to attend, and we thank you for attending and supporting there. It was a fantastic celebration of the project and celebration of continuing to move it forward as a light rail project. So I won't dive in there, but just, the project continues. We are on track to make an announcement of the alignment towards the end of the year. We'll be doing a lot more public meetings and community outreach over the coming months for the project.
Ali, I'm sorry. I just wanted to say one thing about that. First of all, congratulations. It was a great event. Thank you for it not being 120 degrees in the first event.
Not control.
I've been asked by commissioners and by others outside the commission, what's your role with respect to the Red Line? And I think, that's something we have to continue to talk about. This commission is not making the mode determination, the alignment determination, et cetera. We realize those are not only outside our scope, but well beyond what we could possibly do. It requires a zillion inputs. But we should continue to talk about how we can be kept in the loop and what we can do. I know we're not just going to want to sit idly by while Red Line chugs along. But we recognize also, at least I recognize that, it's, as a practical matter, it's hard for us to be involved in any sort of nitty-gritty way. That said, the one area, of course, and we'll get to this over and over again, is the funding piece. And I think it is well within our scope to be part of the advocacy and part of the storytelling about why the Red Line is so critical. And I know there'll be a role for us there. So I'm just putting that on the table, recognizing that, we got to figure out how we can plug into that in a way that is appropriate and constructive.
Yeah, absolutely. And, we've done the one briefing already. We're happy to do other ones at the appropriate time to make sure that you guys are looped in on that. And 100% continued advocacy for, why we need this project. Will be very important.
Thank you.
So still on the Red Line, we also kicks off our community advisory team. So I think I mentioned this before. We had about 300 applicants. We seated right around 25 people. So it was honestly really amazing to see the interest in participating and giving time to the Red Line project. We have an incredibly diverse group of folks who primarily live and work along the corridor, who are giving up their time to help us connect with communities, make sure that we're hearing from the communities. We had the first meeting. I think it was really productive, and we'll be having more later this year as they kind of help us to further build that out. Still on the Red Line, we also launched our Red Line High School internship program. We had this started in 2009 through 2015, and so restarted this year. It's a 6-week program for Edmondson high school students. They had their orientation. I met with them earlier this week, a fantastic group of people who are really excited to get engaged. We have MTA mentors who are assisting them. And so, they're going to learn about transportation investments, how this project is being developed, how transit works, and community engagement. So I'm really excited that we've got this going together. On the Purple Line, so still on our mega projects, yesterday we unveiled our first Purple Line light rail vehicle, which was a really exciting time to be able to see and feel that this thing is real and it's actually happening. 142-foot long vehicles, which is half the length of a football field, And you hear that, but man, you get down there and you actually get on the vehicle and see it. It is a big vehicle. So it's very exciting to see that. Program line continues to chug along. We've made some good progress this summer. The vehicles actually will be on the test track by the end of the year. And so again, people will get to see that out there. We've also been pushing forward with a number of grant awards. I'm not going to steal Dave's thunder, but we were successful in getting a $4.7 million raise grant for the Reisterstown Plaza TOD, which I'll talk about in a little bit. We supported Prince George's County in a low-no application, and they were awarded $25.4 million. So I was down there with them to celebrate on Tuesday. And then Howard County was successful in winning just shy of $1 million for the bus and bus facilities grant for 2 new buses that will help better connect the RTA system to MTA. So all grants we're thrilled to support and continue to push forward with. Unfortunately, that means MTA was not successful in winning a low-no or bus and bus facilities grant. We had applied for Eastern, but we're going to continue to look for funding sources for that. On the service side, so you guys have the updates on the service, but I did want to celebrate, we had ridership highs in May. So it's over 6 million rides in the month of May for the first time since 2019. That was post-COVID highs for bus, metro, and mobility. We've also continued to make progress on our core service cuts. So I mentioned before, like our goal is to deliver, more than 99% of service. In June, we had 6 days that were below 2%. We've now had several days that have been below 1% cuts and a couple that have been below 0.5%. So the team continues to chug along and make sure that we're providing that quality service and improve reliability. I'll say it kind of silly, but we had our real time go down earlier this week, which is unfortunate because you don't know necessarily when the bus is going to come. You're relying on schedules. And so, I was going home, riding the bus in the heat. Bus came generally when it was scheduled. Like that's when this reliability matters more than anything else. Is like, you're going to go to the stop, the bus is actually going to come. You don't have to worry about it being cut. So the team has continued to be focused on that. On the commuter bus side, we did have our new schedules that went into effect July 1st. In most cases, it's a kind of a S+ schedule. We've been monitoring ridership, monitoring how that's performing, but there's some adjustments I think we have to make. It's been a little tricky so far because all the service that goes into DC has been impacted by NATO. So I don't think we'll have real changes until probably later in the month where we get a better sense of how things are going. On the engagement front, we continue to be really involved with the community, recognize the importance of MTA to the community and vice versa. We participated in the Pride Parade. We had multiple cooling buses and staff at AFRAM to participate. And then we've also been doing a lot of employee engagement, including field visits, bus operator graduations, and we celebrated National Safety Month where everyone wears green on Fridays for safety. And we want to thank you, those of you who were able to make the first of the commission tours on June 27th. I know our team was thrilled to show you all around MTA and to host, and so thank you for those who are coming. I believe the next two are scheduled for next week and then the end of the month, and so we're looking forward to hosting that as well.
I have not, my tour got bumped by the red line announcement, which is totally fine. But I did hear great feedback from commissioners and from MTA staff and others just about the quality of the tours, the engagement, the experience, and the value to commissioners of seeing it, from that perspective. So I'm glad we did that. Thank you. And we'll obviously have to finish the task when we reschedule.
So no, we're happy to host. That's kind of it for my updates. I know we also sent out the metrics. A couple there I wanted to highlight. On the hiring fronts, I think we're at 0.6% vacancy rate on operators. So, the team has continued to do a fantastic job on hiring. Also wanted to highlight mobility. I think I mentioned before that we've been struggling a little bit with on-time performance with mobility. We've dipped down below 90%. For the past month, a couple months, we've been back up above 93%. We've had some days that have been 96, 97% on time. So the team really focused, got it back where it needed to be, and we're going to continue to make sure that that's happening. We did work with the contractors and the union, so it was a really good partnership there to have an increase in wages for their union employees so that we can attract more operators. And so I think that's been successful and we've heard good feedback on that. And I also wanted to highlight and acknowledge the on-time or the cut service for core bus went down a little bit in May. That's mostly driven by the fact that we had a 3-week bus bridge on the south end of our light rail system when we were doing the de-stressing work there. So because of that, it does impact bus when we have to take our buses away to provide those bus bridges. But again, I mentioned earlier in June, it's continuing to go in the right, the trend is going in the right direction.
Thank you.
Questions?
Questions for the administrator? Thanks, Holly. We, just with regard to this part of this segment of the agenda, what we're trying to do is to develop a kind of rhythm where you're getting information in every meeting that is in similar format from one to the other, and also then allowing the administrator to reiterate anything in that information, the data sort of stuff, ridership and on time and so on. And then also to highlight other things as she's just done. Welcome your rolling feedback on what you want to hear, how you want to see it, et cetera, as we continue to tweak. I'm very satisfied with this format, but I want to make sure that everybody else feel like you're getting what you need. We have 2 significant presentations this morning. One coming up next is on the CTP process. The other is on TOD. Doug, we're ready to turn to CTP with Joe. Just briefly introduce Joe McAndrew, who I guess can give a little bit, I wouldn't mind hearing a little self-introduction about your path to this, but Joe and I have worked together in the transportation space for some time. I was very happy to see him land at MDOT, where he, I think, is really committed to all sorts of program reforms and just all the things that the governor and the secretary and the team are trying to do to make MDOT MTA better and to commit particularly to transit in Baltimore. This commission has a distinct role with respect to the budget process as outlined in the statute. And you will recall that we wrote I wrote on behalf of the commission to the secretary and the administrator back in May, asking to start that off. We recognize that it's kind of a new structure. You know, there hasn't been a commission. There hasn't been this kind of information sharing before. It's a learning process for everybody. The secretary responded to say, you know, yep, we understand. We'll work with you on this. We'll figure it out together. And now we're continuing to implement that as we roll through the development of the next CTP. Joe's presentation will take us through some of the, again, stuff you probably know or at least have seen, which is just the basic background. How does this work? What's the process? Who are the players? What's the critical path? To give some framing for it, and then talk more specifically about the, you know, what the budget prospects look like for MTA, for the department, et cetera. So I won't say any more about that. He's got a good set of slides, and I'm sure there'll be a lot of questions, comments, and dialogue. So Joe, I'll turn it over to you. Feel free, if you'd like, to give us just a little bit of background on yourself and your path. And are you going to stay there? What's your plan?
I can go with that. I mean, either way, I could drive it.
Sure. I'll stay seated.
Can he be heard well enough? I assume.
Yeah.
So thank you, Chair, and thank you to all the commissioners for your time and support of kind of the transit program and the good work that Holly did day in and day out. I been in the position for about a year now. I'm also standing in for a better looking and more funny Assistant Secretary Tony Bridges today, who's in Houston at a conference. But I serve as the Assistant Secretary overseeing planning and project development and supporting the delivery of projects for the department. Prior to this, I was working for a group called the Greater Washington Partnership, where I engaged many of you with some of our business leaders, encouraging, nudging, thanking, prodding the region forward on key transportation investments from Baltimore to Richmond. But in this role, it's been an illuminating first year and a great opportunity to kind of help take some of the good work that we were doing together and try to push it forward from where I sit. You know, I think at the outset, you guys may know this, but Secretary Wiedefeld is committed to the task of the commission and the work that you guys are doing, and you've got a great administrator, Holly Arnold and team, in terms of what they're up to. I'm here today to give you guys a kind of a point in time update on where we're at in the process on the CTP, the Consolidated Transportation Program, our 6-year capital budget. And then, I think today it'd be informative for us to get, early directional feedback of where we're at, and priorities or wants for the commission. Because we are moving forward with the draft as we get closer to final on the revenue side of what we're doing. So we'll go to the next slide. Thank you. I'll breeze through the first couple slides. I think many of you guys have seen this or are aware of it, but it's important to note MDOT as a whole is a unique DOT relative to many of our state peers throughout the country. We're multimodal in nature. We operate and fund and finance transit throughout the state, in particular two large transit systems throughout the state. And so as well as the airport, the port, the toll authority, and the motor vehicle administration, as well as the highway administration. Next slide. The trust fund in particular is unique as well. It is, set up to be nimble and be able to allow us to invest across all of our modal needs and statewide needs as they come forward. It's integrated, it's multimodal, and it really kind of supports the backbone of all of our work. Next slide. So our funding, this is FY23, what you can see here, but there is a trust fund constitutional locks box that was established in 2014, but we've got a few different sources. They're pretty traditional in terms of where funds come from. But you can see here our largest funding sources are the motor fuel tax and the vehicle titling tax. Those we are able to pledge for debt and bond payments, so we can go ahead and do more with fiscal control and constraint. But our total program on the capital side, or total, is about 4.2 billion that we had in FY23. Next slide.
So can I just one housekeeping? You don't mind if people ask questions during, is that correct? I assume.
More than willing to stop and pause.
Yeah, and obviously if it's like, if it's, I'll get to it later, then that's fine. And I assume, I just asked the staff, I assume that the commissioners who are online can let you know if they have questions, and will signal to you, so they'll let you know. And so the invitation is, if folks have questions and it makes more sense to try and have it addressed in real time, just raise your hand or, raise your virtual hand or whatever works. Thank you. Sorry, Jim.
Joe, let me just ask you a question real quick. The vehicle title and tax. I know that fees are going to be raised at MTA. Is all of that going into the trust fund, and how much is expected to increase?
Let me not speak out of
Is it
turn.
later on?
We can get you guys a pretty detailed kind of assessment of the fees that changed, that took effect in July, as well as the schedule, because there's additional fees that will change in the coming months as well, in terms of where they're going and the estimates fully. But yeah, most of it all is going to the trust fund.
I'm sorry, so you're talking about the money that was raised at the end of the last session with the compromise that was struck between the governor? No, we're talking about.
No, fees increased July 1.
Yeah.
New bill for, well, yeah.
As a result of that legislation.
Yes.
So the question is, how much is anticipated? And I think we saw there were some estimates, 300 something million or something like that. But I think the question that was lingering was, there was a waterfall somewhere in that legislation that was never totally clear to me exactly what that waterfall meant or how mandated it was. So I think the question, and if you're not asking it, I'll just add to it to say, how has the department programmed that new revenue? Does it go to, transit? Does it go to HUR? Does whatever that is? So if you want to get back to us on that, that's fine. But if we're taking down questions, trying to understand the impact of last session in terms of both revenue expectations and then what the sort of who the expected beneficiaries are of that.
And I think some of it will play out in terms of the draft CTP, but I can give you a snapshot of where we were at the end of last quarter in a little bit here.
Okay.
And some of the fees, we can control, so we were able to change through our regulatory process, like parking fees at the airport, for example, and then others needed, legislative approval. So we'll give you the full menu, kind of what's happened and where the funds are going and all that stuff. So just real quick here, the funds come into the trust fund, and then this is just kind of showing where or first calls on that money. So first, we need to pay our debt, and then we need to pay our operating. And what's left there goes into the capital program. The capital program, what's important is what's left can also be leveraged by other funds, operating and debt, not so much, but on the capital, we've got a lot of federal aid that, generally rule of thumb is 80-20. So, you can leverage a state dollar 4 times over, as well as other types of things like bond sales that come into play. Next slide. This is a little bit of just an overview of what the CTP is. It's a 6-year program, and it ultimately, the first years are our budget years, and then our out years are our kind of planning years. But this identifies project needs and ultimate investments across our entire portfolio for all of our modes and all of our infrastructure assets. Next slide. So a little bit on the statutory requirements, just so everybody's aware. This is in code. We need to update our 6-year program annually. It needs to be fiscally constrained. It requires that we submit the draft CTP on or before September 1 for public consumption, as well as printing copies to the General Assembly. We then need between September 1 and November 15th to go meet, be invited. Ultimately, it's the county's or local government's opportunity to host MDOT to discuss the CTP or other transportation needs, and we do that on an annual basis with many of our partners here, but every county and the city and the state. It also has a certain scoring element called Chapter 30, which for those that were on the Train Commission are aware, the administration as well as the Train Commission would like to take a fresh look at Chapter 30 and the project prioritization process and see if we can't go ahead and beef that up and start to look at our investments in a more transparent, accountable, kind of goal-oriented, value-oriented manner. And so we're working on that right now. I think, we'd love to come back and engage this group once we're ready. We would be doing it hand in hand with when we're ready to engage the Train Commission, which is getting reestablished and reconstituted.
Can I ask you a question about that? Those of us who either on or watch the Train Commission, there was this broad consensus, including by the department, I think represented by you at the time, that the CTP process needs some overhaul. Everybody's talked about that. I'm just trying to figure out when will we know what that overhaul looks like, and is it going to affect this cycle, or we need another cycle to sort of get it work?
Yeah, I think there are certain things that we can do within our regulatory control to improve transparency and accountability. We will look to do that as well where we can. But I think, to really address it, we're probably going to need some legislation next year. And so I think, we're working through what that may look like and what the gives and takes are. But what's important to note is this is a change that impacts all of us, right? Local partners, private partners, and the state. We want to make sure that the process is as important as the end product. Because I think if we just roll it out and say, this is how it's being done, that's probably not the way to bring people along and ultimately, deliver a program that we're all proud of.
Yeah, that makes complete sense. I'm just trying to establish, just keep it clear. So do you expect this year's CTP process to be substantially similar to the prior processes, with the idea that you're working through a reconfigured one? Okay.
That's the end.
So digging down in that just a little bit more, coming in, the formula for the lots was going to change and be introduced to the local jurisdictions. What's the status?
It was. The formula that we sent out is what's in place for this fiscal year.
The formula that you sent out right before the new administration came in?
We made some tweaks to it, I believe, and then sent it. The team has been working with the lots over the past year plus on what the formula is going to look like, and it is in place for FY25.
Can the commissioners see what it was and what you changed it to, and the outreach that you did to the lots?
Sure.
Thank you.
Next slide. So just a little bit of kind of where we are and where we're at. We do this annually. What we do, in the first quarter of the calendar year is kind of identify our modal needs and start to assess kind of what their priorities would be. At the same time, we're starting to ask for and request our local partners start to identify their priorities as well, that there's a process that they submit priority letters for us, we review and consider as part of the process. And then what we're doing right now is really kind of looking at the budget forecasting and local and modal project reviews. We've got the local and modal project reviews. What we don't have yet is a final financial forecast that can help us articulate how much money we have and different types of opportunities that we have there. But we should have that soon and be able to, to move forward with a solidified draft CTP. From there, then, we released the final or the draft in September. We engaged the community and our stakeholders, and we present a final CTP to the General Assembly that they ultimately engage the process through the General Assembly process. Then we start it all back up over. Next slide. So on the capital side, right? So going back to the previous waterfall, a lot of funds get pulled out before we ever get to the capital. You've got debt payments, you've got operating, and then what remains is funds for capital. Some of those have restrictions on them as well, but generally this is the flow. The first call is funds that go to HUR, lots, WMATA, those things that are kind of grants off the top. Then, we articulate what a state of good repair need is and ultimately allocate the funds there. After that, what's left for expansion and enhancements flow through the modal administrations as well as, within that context, allocation of funds towards priority projects within our local jurisdictions as well.
Joe, let me ask you a question here, in terms of the CTP guideline, or timeline. So the commission is charged to give recommendations on the budget. The letters have come in, you all are in the process of drafting the CTP. When will the commission have an opportunity to give you feedback so that it could be considered in the final?
So I think, some of it is this is an opportune time to engage. I think, we would like to probably re-engage in conversations as we can as we go forward in August ahead of the draft and the final. But I think, to be completely transparent, if you guys want to see a budget, we just don't have it right now. We will hopefully have a pretty final one in the not too distant future. But I think, we're still probably a couple weeks out before we can have a conversation about what that looks like in earnest.
I just want to pick up on that a little bit. I mean, we're recognized as a new paradigm at work here, and everybody's got to sort of sort that out. I don't think we can be as constructive as we need to be, or frankly, as the statute requires, if the exercise is abstract, right? And the problem is right now, it feels like an abstract exercise. In my druthers, right, it would be something like, we see what MTA's unconstrained budget needs are. And in a way, we've seen that because Holly in the past has sort of said, here are our needs, we'll get, I think those numbers are in later slides. And I don't know whether the department then says, we'll look at those against a number, and maybe there's an answer to this question. Like, does the department sort of say, look, MTA, here's the number you got to budget to, which would not, we do that in our organizations all the time, right? Division, your division, you're going to get X million this year, whatever it is, figure it out. Or just tell us what you think you need and we'll all sit down together and work it out. So I'm trying to understand what that process looks like and where we can engage in that process constructively. Because, I don't know exactly what it should look like, but again, in my head, it's something like there's a set of unconstrained needs and then MTA says, these are unconstrained needs. And we say, well, okay, but why have you prioritized this or that? Our view is, let's have a discussion about it, right? Maybe we think the priority should be something different, but you can't do that around an abstraction. You can only do it around numbers. So I'm trying to figure out how we can intersect with this process at a point where it matters. And I think my view, which we said in the letter, which is it is definitely not after the publication of the draft CTP. I don't think that's what the statute says, and I'm not a transportation expert, but I'm a lawyer. So I read the statute. It basically, it's clear to me that the engagement has to occur before the draft, not after the draft. And I'm not saying that you have a magic wand way to make that happen, because I understand the process in which you're engaged. But somehow we have to reconcile all of that so that we're not just sitting here going, well, transit is important, we should have more money. You know, it needs to be something more meaty than that.
Yeah.
And I'm asking for us to engage in a collective dialogue about how we can do that in a way that's going to be meaningful. And I don't know if you have an answer for it today, but I want to just say sort of on the record, that's what we're aspiring for. I think that's what the statute requires, and we just need to figure that out. Otherwise, we're just going to be talking about how great transit is. So that's just not enough.
Yeah, I mean, so I think this year we've got additional work to do. So I think we need to go back and have a conversation at a later point in terms of what we can and can't do and how we can, bring this commission into the process that's ongoing. I think, and when we think about prioritization writ large, the intent is multifaceted, but one is transparency and accountability, right? Like articulating what our revenues are projected publicly early, and then identifying what the needs are. Because if folks aren't aware that we only have a penny, but they're asking for $1 billion, it's kind of a tough challenge, right? So we have to be more transparent with our partners so that everybody is moving forward together. Because I think that's the way we have a better, stronger system. So, that's that process, and we're working through that process, and we hope to be able to come back on that front too. I think, one thing to illuminate, and this might not the interpretation of the law, but for consideration, just think this through. We put out a draft in September, right? There is a whole process before we finalize it in January. And then the General Assembly also has their say as well through the General Assembly process. So before it gets final on June 30th every year, there's many, many months, many, many conversations as well that play out over that period. So, I don't want to say that the draft is the final, because that's just not the case. It is a point in time static of where we are and what's being proposed at that juncture. Revenues can change, revenues can go down.
Yeah, I'm sure you'll hear from us after the draft CTP comes out, along with everybody else who's interested as a stakeholder. I just think there needs to be a way for us to be involved one click earlier in that process in order to do the job we've been asked to do and charged to do, and also in a way that can be helpful. I mean, we're all working together for the same purpose here, which is to try and increase, availability and deal with the prioritization, all sorts of stuff. So I just want to put a certain amount of pressure on here to sort of say, look, like, that's where we think we need to be. And I know that this first year cycle is a learning experience, but we have a chance now to do it, I think, the way it needs to be done. And I would ask you to think with your colleagues about how we can be in possession of information, with numbers that allow us to engage and really talk about what we think the priorities are. Which may or may not be, frankly, the administrator's priorities. We're here to provide the perspective of 16 people who've been appointed by various schools. That's what we're here for in part. So I'm just anxious to make sure that happens, and I don't want it to be sort of like, we show up and we go, thanks for the draft CTP, and here, what I'm saying. Aaron, please.
I mean, not to try to point out the obvious, but in prior iterations of this group, when we're doing the work group that informed the legislation, I think I had it in my mind that there was a kind of a collaborative process that would happen with MTA before the budget gets to the Secretary's office. That would be informative. Like it would be more collaborative and conversation and setting out and understanding the priorities and kind of the constraints we're working in that would then feed into the departmental decisions. That was kind of what I recall, kind of some of the intent and kind of where we were hoping to be in the process. I mean, if that can be helpful, I mean, that's just, I don't know if anybody others had that kind of thought. And so that's kind of where we were. Ideally, I mean, if we could figure out a way to make that, how that could happen and where we would slide into that would be, I think, fulfill the intent.
I had a couple questions on process, kind of based on this slide. So first, I just want to clarify that the way this flows is that WMATA, comes out much earlier than you go into the modes here, which is NTA. So can you talk a little bit about you know, and I know this is an existing process and you're talking about changing the process, but WMATA comes well ahead of MTA conversation. Again, I know it's flow chart, so just, can you talk a little bit to that?
Yeah, so WMATA is a grant, right? And MTA is party to kind of the entire modal operation. So it in good times, WMATA might not benefit from, you know, revenue going this direction. On bad times, because some of WMATA's funds, specifically its capital programs are you know, pledged to debt. Those are grants that we've committed ourselves to as a state that we need to make. So that's kind of the differentiation, I'd say, in particular.
Okay, and then I had one other question. In terms of state of good repair, what is the prioritization among the agencies within MDOT when you talk about state of good repair? Like, is it agency? Is it size of project? Is there some kind of matrices of import of project?
Great question. So I just got an email from our asset management lead, who oversees it for the department. We're currently updating our state asset management program. And I think, you know, this is an evolution across modes. Federally, the Federal Highway Administration has for years been a little bit farther along in terms of asset management requirements, in terms of life cycle costs and maintenance. The Federal Transit Administration in the last decade has made that a requirement, and so that's, you know, maturing. Across other modes, a little less so, but we as a department are working to improve it. So multimodal across the department, we've been at it for about 6 years in earnest, I'd say, maybe more, maybe less, but the maturity of the department's ability to have the right data sets, the data governance, but then also understand what the needs look like is getting far better. I think the next step where the secretary and we would like to go is, well, what does that mean? You have all this information. How much money would it take to go from, say, 75 to 80%, right? And what does that get us? Because at a certain point in time, there's like diminishing returns of moving from 95 to 99. Because if you go to 99 here, you're putting money there versus other places. So I'd say our ability to make those strategic decisions is getting better, and that's where we're, you know, on the evolution trying to head.
So that's not like called out anywhere in this CTP process, like in a clear way right now. Is that fair to say?
So there are top line budgets, and then there are kind of, you know, expansion and enhancement programs. But within, you know, MTA's budget, it's more of a programmatic investment, whether it be tracks and signals or rail car fleet maintenance type of operations.
Yeah, I mean, if I could add for the MTA prioritization, I think we've presented on this as part of the CNI and our asset management. We have a pretty robust, mature prioritization program where we take a look at, you know, criticality, how many people are riding, safety, like we have a number of things that are weighed within it. So within MTA, we do have that system. We do use it for our safety repair.
But this chart shows MDOT taking all the agencies and making that decision, correct?
We have that ability. I would say, generally speaking, you know, we rely on the talents of our modes to, you know, as the subject matter experts within their kind of mission and remit. You know, where we get involved is, you know, trying to create that multimodal forward evolutionary arc. There's also opportunities to learn, right? If MTA is doing a good job, it's not to say, you know, it's not apples to apples all the time, but there's also opportunities for our department to learn from each other.
Mr. Chairman, can I ask a question?
Mind if you go to the?
I'm listening in and I'm just curious, because I haven't heard it yet, about whether we're going to actually get the chance to see the MTA budget. I mean, I've heard the conversation, but I just haven't gotten the clarity, or I'm not hearing clarity on that. So I'm just trying to see whether you can get an answer on that.
So we're planning on at the next meeting presenting on the MTA capital budget.
Which version, like which stage of it, meaning based upon unconstrained need? I mean, you know, it's a funnel of sorts, right?
The plan is to present on what is in the budget. I mean, we're happy to share what needs are versus what's funded. And I think that can be a discussion between now and the next meeting.
All right. Okay, Scott, did you get that?
I did, thank you.
Lester, yeah, please.
I'm curious, this may be a formulary or a formula question, but when you got extreme need versus resource challenges, how do you, I get in theory, like in big terms about the prioritization, but I'm wondering what that looks like when the rubber meets the road. When you've got, maybe is that like one advocate, internal advocate who's better than someone else who can, I'm just curious, how do you actually make those decisions? Is it purely a scientific driven process? Is there some way in there for others? I don't have a good sense of how that goes.
Yeah, so we've got a bunch of experts that kind of at the modes and then also at the secretary's office that have been at this for a long time. We've got to trust that, they know their assets and their needs better than a lot of folks, right? In terms of what the investments look like. But there's trade-offs, right? Say if, just as a hypothetical, all of our bridges are at 90% good condition on our highway system. Would it be better to continue to maintain it at that investment in a constrained environment, or flex it over to say transit that needs state of good repair investments that might be bigger? There's a trade-off decision, right? And that's what we have as a department to make. If let the bridges maybe deteriorate a little bit. We'll have a cost later that might come at some level, but it gives us the ability to make renewal payments, recapitalize the system at MTA. I think that those are the trade-offs that we have to make within a constrained fiscal environment that we have. We're not there today. I'll just say that much in terms of asset management. We're not able to look at that universe and make those strategic decisions because our data and our strategic prioritization just isn't there. In terms of when we get to prioritization of the enhancement program that we're envisioning, and the aim is to be transparent through the whole process, right? So project comes in and we as a state have goals and values, right? We can assign criteria to those goals and values, whether it be environmental, social equity, access and connectivity, what have you. So we want to go ahead and take every dollar that we have in the program and assign it and run it through a program and see, does it meet the goals and values and does it warrant investment? Because the reality is we'll never have enough money for everybody's wants and needs. That's just, nobody will, this state or otherwise. So we need to ultimately do this in a way that builds trust and confidence, that we're spending the public dollars in a manner that they want it to be spent. And I think this is the process that we're going to go. At the end of the day, we haven't really updated the CTP program or process in years. And so we will continue again on an evolutionary step of learning, growing, and maturing as we go.
Someone have a question? Do you have something else?
I did. So I'm trying to understand WMATA being a grant.
Mm-hmm.
And how you balance the needs of MTA versus the needs of WMATA if WMATA is a grant.
Mm-hmm.
And they get their slice early in the game before you even start to deal with the modes. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, that's interesting. I mean, so I also, it's not a trophy that anybody can be excited by, but it's the Secretary's designee on the WMATA board.
Mm-hmm.
And so back in 2018, the General Assembly said, if the Secretary, such the governor, have such control over the state's budget, we should go ahead and put the Secretary on WMATA's board. So I'm the Secretary's designee. WMATA's budget is a little bit different in terms of a scheduling process than all of ours. We start our process in September from a draft perspective and then move it through to final in June. Theirs starts in November, December, and finalizes in April. So when they're coming, saying this is next year's bill, it's a little later in the cycle than ours. So by having us sitting on the board through that budgeting process, we can inform what we can afford or what we want to afford. And we have to do it in partnership with our colleagues that are appointed from our other jurisdictions in Virginia, the district, and the federal government. So that's generally the process. It is a grant at the end of the day of what gets approved at that board is what we will ultimately pay typically. We could of course say no, after the fact, but that isn't probably appropriate. So we have opportunities through that budgeting process as board members, to ultimately inform, the decisions that are made there. We as a state, are the primary funder of WMATA. We fund our contribution, the state of Maryland funds our contribution out of the trust fund. There is some general fund support as well through the dedicated money, in 2018. We also do the same here, for the Baltimore core service as well.
Let me just piggyback on that for a minute. I mean, this is a bit of an elephant in the room question. It was during the General Assembly session when I was down there testifying on the MTA budget. And I do think that, you know, this commission there needs to be a conversation about, you know, we're all, in fact, I'm sort of agnostic about transit advocacy in the sense that I want transit everywhere, including in Metro DC. It's great. I'm not trying to take it away from Vermont. But it's hard not to see a fundamental inequity when you have one transit system that basically, because of what are really contractual, I mean, we've agreed by this tri-party agreement with DC and Virginia, so therefore it's an agreement, so therefore we fund it because the state funds its obligation. That's not really the answer to the question. The answer is, why is it structured that way? Why do we agree contractually to take this money off the top? And it's not a decision that happened in this administration. But it creates and has created for a long time an inequity where WMATA gets this money, and I'm sure they think they're underfunded as well. In fact, they know they are. They think they are funded. But they get their money, and then the waterfall, and MTA sort of gets it. Just, you know, that just doesn't seem equitable. And I don't know what the solution to that is, but you know, this at some point we have to talk about why, you know, what is the consequence of that? I mean, to me, the consequence of that is we don't get as much money as we should. But I'd like to, and you can, again, this is a great conversation to have. You know a lot about this. I'm not expecting you, Joe, to be able to say, here's the answer to that question. But this is a conversation we're gonna start and keep going, which is, why is it built this way? Why does WMATA get its money sort of off the top because someone signed an agreement, however, you know, long ago they signed it? And what effect does that have on the waterfall, such that MTA then has to sort of fight for the remaining money after that happens? And you can, I mean, I'm perfectly happy to have someone push back on that and say, well, you're not understanding this, you're not understanding that. Really, because I might be wrong, but it's just troublesome to see one transit system up the waterfall and then our transit system, you know, down there. And while we're agnostic about transit, or at least I am, we are legally charged with sticking up for Baltimore Regional Transit, and that's what we're trying to do here.
Yeah, and
So any reaction to that?
I mean, it's fair. I think there are a few, we could nitpick some of it, but I think the want to improve Baltimore's transit system is shared by the secretary, shared by myself, shared by the governor. And I think, you know, the question becomes, what's the best way to do it, right? I don't think that you're gonna find this administration say that we don't want better transit. I think it's the other way around. I think the commitment is strong. I think it's the question of how we do it. And so I think, you know, understanding what's on the agenda to come in terms of, you know, governance and operation for this body is a worthwhile endeavor to happen. I don't think that, you know, this administration is going to be a over my dead body. No, you know, I think that we want to be collaborative and partnering, because at the end of the day, that's how you move the conversation forward.
So is there a way, and you know, I think to the chair's point, I do want to make sure that we're understanding the same thing. And so I agree with what the chair stated around WMATA and the difficulties that are posed. Is there a way to figure out, does the administration feel the same way? Is that notion around the agreement that was struck and the arrangement with WMATA, not regardless of whether we can do anything about it there or not, but is that a fundamental understanding that makes sense, or is there some daylight or disconnect between where the agency sees it and where we, you know, folks on this commission may see it? Because that to me, it would be helpful to know if there's daylight.
I mean, I think there's certainly, we would naturally work with Administrator Arnold to identify the path forward, but there's certainly daylight for conversation about, what's the optimal operating model. I think, it comes down to, let me just show this up. There's no perfect authority. I think you can go around the country and you can't pick up one and say, that's what I want here. So I think, can we do better? Undoubtedly. What's the right process? At the end of the day, we've got to also identify who and how we're going to pay for it. And then, who ultimately is going to be overseeing it. Because I think that those are real questions. But at the end of the day, the outcome is what we're after, right? Better service, reliable service, not cut service, growing the system. But we got to maintain the system too. And so, those are the types of things that you would hopefully be, identifying your goals up front so that your governance decisions, if we're going to do anything differently, ultimately deliver that better outcome.
I'm gonna try and let you move on from this slide, although it's such an important slide. But could you just the baseline sort of set, just remind everybody, I think people know this, but I think it's worth it, we have public participation, et cetera. Just remind us, we've talked about WMATA and the agreements, right? Just remind us why HUR and lots end up in that higher bucket in particular. And then, on the state of good repair, I'll just preempt this question to say, I think early on we said, well, obviously, since we're not totally fulfilling our state of good repair, theoretically, there would be nothing left. Theoretically, be nothing left for the capital funds. And the obvious answer to that is, well, we do the best we can on state of good repair. We do the stuff that we absolutely need to do, making sure that there's money left over, which is why you can put state of good repair in the waterfall and not use up all the money, right? So I think that's a softer thing. That's a judgment call. But can you just comment on, for the record, for everybody on HUR and lots and what puts them up in that higher bucket?
I mean, some of it is legislated, right? So, HU, of course, we can try to lower or change or increase those dollars in our budgeting process, but those are oftentimes articulated in code or statute of what we need to do, specifically HUR. Lots is a grant and it's a formula, right? In the same way that you could kind of treat it or think of WMATA as a formula.
Yeah. It's
a formula, you pull it out, you pay it, and then you have what's left and you try to do it. But also just, caveat that there is a federal funds component here. Sometimes you can flex, but you cannot flex everything.
Thanks. I think just everybody's hearing the same thing. Okay. Please proceed, Joe. Thank you.
Great questions. I'll just say that much. So next slide. So you guys are well steeped in this. I don't need to spend too much time on this, but MTA has a robust articulation of capital needs, both state of good repair and desires for growth. They provide that information to us, and you guys have seen it as well. And they will be updating their capital needs inventory in the not too distant future. But the need is real. The opportunity for investment is there. I think, making sure that we can both make the investment but deliver upon the promise of the investment is very important as well. So you guys are looking at some of that, but the team's doing great work, doing what they can to get us out of the state of good repair backlog. At the bottom, I think, important to note, we do so a lot of focus is on the draft CTP, but we do quarterly meetings throughout the year to assess how the program is advancing, as well as kind of do an assessment of how our finances are. Because at the end of the day, if we're spending, we don't have the money, we might need to tamp it down just a little bit. So we do not have, our Q1 of 25, fiscal year 25 finances yet, but for Q4, which we, it will be fully closed in a few weeks to a month. We were very fortunate to have the additional fees and revenue generated by it from the General Assembly. And I'll get into it in a little bit, but at the end of the fiscal year, we were sitting fine. And I think some of the stuff that you guys have seen articulated in terms of news that Holly provided today is where a lot of that money has gone, right? In terms of SGR investments, in terms of maintaining a robust level of commuter bus operations, and the like. So I think, we are at the end of Q4 doing fine, but I think, there's opportunities for changes ahead, but we won't know the full answer here for a bit. So next slide.
Before you go on, I have just two questions about this. One is, the 4.5 billion, which is the correct, is the 2022 CNI number. I think MTA has presented to us previously that number, and we've used this number publicly, frankly, in the press, is like almost double that. We expect the new CNI number to be something like 980 million, or I went back and looked at the numbers presented previously. So, I mean, it's not consequential. Well, it's very consequential, but I mean, it just means it's a bigger gap, right? I mean, if you go, the CNI is grown gigantically. So the question is, now the gap's bigger, now what?
Yep.
Right.
I think, this presents an opportune time to say one thing that I haven't said yet, is that the trust fund was established in the early 70s. Our two transit operations were not as mature as they are now. And I think, we're still operating on a trust fund model that works, and it is very nice to have, but it doesn't necessarily, I think, fully consider the fact that we as a state fund two very large transit systems. MTA is a very large transit system, WMATA is a very large transit system. And so, there's opportunities to think about that, what that means, is above my pay grade. But I think those are the challenges sometimes of, how you ultimately take care of both of them, as well as the State Highway Administration, as well as the Port Administration, as well as the Toll Authority, as well as aviation and motor vehicles. So.
Yeah. And then, I'm sorry, Lake.
I was just gonna say, I have a follow-on to that, because I mean, my recollection was it was just shy of $1 billion a year, because it's pretty impactful number, but it included, more than what's here, which is that commitment, right, to both Purple Line and Tunnel. And so now we're back to kind of the WMATA conversation, when a commitment happens, how does that stay in the mix from a funding perspective? So I think you bring up a very interesting question, or maybe where we need to center some of our trade-off discussion is around that is around the use of trust fund funds. I think correlated to that for me, I had a question about, and it just to me related to what you were just bringing up about the trust fund, is, what there's been coverage of the change in the Moody's outlook, and how is that going to impact how these capital funds are allocated and our ability to take on, or, okay, is that later? Got it, okay.
I wanted to, this last bullet, was sort of news to me. I'm not really familiar with the quarterly. Is that a long-standing process, the quarterly budget reviews, or is that something you guys have kind of?
I believe it is long-standing.
I mean, maybe this isn't time to discuss, but I'd like to understand more about what those are. And again, we are not, I just want to be clear, we're not trying to run this agency or run its budget, right? And we understand that MDOT and MTA have to do their job day to day, and most of us have day jobs. So I totally get that. But I'm wondering what that sequence is like, what process that is, and how the commission can benefit from a greater visibility into that process, which sounds like you're making sort of your quarterly assessments, tweaks, adjustments, we're not, I assume it's things like, well, we're not going to get that money out the door this year because of some external factor. What does that mean? How does that money get? Maybe it's a question for Holly as much as for you. How can we get some visibility into that? Are there numbers produced that sort of show revised, mid-year revisions? What can we gain from understanding how that works?
Yeah, I think it's probably worth a discussion so that we can identify what makes the most sense and what is the most useful. Because our quarterly submissions are, thousands of lines of project by project, and so I need something that's useful to you. I'm happy to chat with Joe on that.
As we start to think about a process for the commission to be able to effectively give feedback, those are the kind of things that we would like to be able to see and help us along the process, because we sit here every other month and we're trying to digest a lot. So we had a process so that we can digest it over time. I think it'll be more beneficial for for us as well as for you all in terms of any feedback that we make. So if you all can find avenues for us to be able to get information along the way, as opposed to us trying to scramble at the very end between that, this time period in September to give you some feedback, that would be really helpful for us, because we got daytime jobs too. Sorry.
We appreciate your time, Karen.
Okay, other questions on this slide anyway? Okay. Thank you.
We're almost done, I promise. So next slide. So I think it is known by this commission that, we had, we're facing fiscal headwinds as we came in to office last year. We did announce and release our final CTP to the General Assembly in January of this year. It was a $20 billion roughly CTP. You can see on the right-hand side of the chart kind of identifying capital and state funds operating versus capital just on the state side. And then, various revenues as well. I think there's just a couple things to note. The operating side is going up. The operating, we were buoyed quite a bit during the pandemic, specifically on the transit side, as well as a few of the other modes as well, to maintain, service with declining revenues. Those COVID aid dollars from the federal government have declined, and that was, a major pressure as well as others. We made strategic decisions to invest in additional operators at MTA and other strategic decisions when we came in. Those had impacts. They're paying off, but those are the trade-off decisions that we have to make, and certainly we can do it together in a more coherent and transparent way in the future. But we have flat revenues, COVID-19 funds were liquidated, and then inflation and operating costs are heading in the wrong direction, all putting pressures on our ability to do as much as we would all like to do. So at the same time, if you go to the next slide, that's just where MDOT is, but at the state level, there's similar types of pressures. So to the Moody's point, we're fortunate to retain our AAA bond rating as a state, but Moody's negative outlook for the future is one that we need to be considering. For MDOT, the way that our bonds are treated we're one below the state. So if the state were to go down, we would go down too, and the cost of borrowing would go up. So we would lose the ability and purchasing power there. So strong consideration and interest of what's happening there. I think you may have seen what the governor did earlier this week in terms of shift around funds to be able to address key priorities for him, and I believe where the General Assembly is at as well. But this is undoubtedly a question that we need to consider as we move forward. How we prioritize the investments that we've promised and articulate how we're going to pay for it, both for us but also for others, state government as well. Next slide.
Joe, I have a question. Will the financial outlook impact? So will it impact the ability for this fund to buy debt?
At this moment, we haven't seen a negative outlook on our debt, and I can confirm that. And if I'm wrong, I'll let you know because I'm not the financial officer, but it's my understanding. I think where we just have to be cognizant of as a state is that we, as the governor says, have a sluggish economy, and I think that sluggish economy, depending on how it goes, will impact consumer rates, and our revenue is consumer driven in terms of miles driven and cars purchased, and so if that slows, it could be challenging. I think we've been proceeding with caution for about a year now. So yeah. All right. Next slide. So just a couple high water marks aside from some challenging times. in 2023, the General Assembly was able to secure around $100 million in additional funds. We put, I believe, roughly 90 million of that towards launching the Red Line project and program. In light of kind of our fiscal situation last year, the governor before, or as part of his budget, allocated $150 million in one-time use funds from the rainy day program to support our needs at MDOT, which was good. What's important to note is it was one time, and we've got kind of multi-year commitments, whether it be operating and capital. And so if you can go to the next slide there, Don. The General Assembly was able, and we greatly appreciate it, to provide additional support on top of what we were able to do or get approval from to address some fees. So we're expecting, roughly $250 million in additional revenue, ish, and that will grow over time. But that $150 million was one time. So that 250 actually netted out, 75 to $100 million of new money. So while we are immeasurably benefited from it, it is not 250 million of net new in the ongoing cycle of the program, which I think is important. But I think your advocacy, anybody that was advocating for it, we appreciate it. It is a lifeline that keeps us afloat. Next slide.
Will these funds be used solely for these purposes? Well, they can just go into the trust fund and be available to others.
So right now, we were intending, and this is part of the conversation we had with the General Assembly, they were asking where we were planning to spend the funds. We plan to allocate where we can additional funds to the Red Line, state of good repair investments, federal matches. That was a big one in terms of we've secured some big grants. We were constrained fiscally. So they're going to support some of that stuff, as well as increase operating assistance for commuter bus as well.
And you're going to get back to us from an hour ago with the sort of the new money, how you're generally, not the 150 also, but the new money raised by the legislature in terms of taxes, stat.
Yeah, we're going to get you a full listing of the fees.
Both sources and uses, right?
Yeah. So I'll just breeze through this just to make sure that and this is MTA team is really good at looking forward at the federal discretionary grants that are available. So we've been able to work. I think I see Sean Winkler here. He's our kind of federal grants pro that you guys might have partnered with, whether it be at the local level or at various state grants. But that $214 million grant there for light rail vehicles is mission critical to make sure that we can go ahead and recapitalize the existing system, let alone build a new line. And so we've provided 90 million in state match. Got a couple raised grants of late there that are exciting. We've got a West Baltimore TOD planning grant, and we're in partnership with the city and Baltimore County right now and looking at a bigger raised grant because that NOFO is out now too. So looking at the entirety of the potential Red Line corridor for transit-oriented development. And we've got a couple of discretionary grants that are in right now that we expect to come out soon. That climate pollution reduction grant, that's a one-time grant through the IRA program that EPA controls, enough acronyms there, but zero match, which would be great. And then, the multimodal project there for the Penn Camden connector, we don't expect to hear back until the fall.
Joe, it's not a grant per se, but it just reminds me when you get into the federal stuff. What, maybe a separate conversation about Garvey bonds? I mean, is there an opportunity to access greater Garvey funding for the things that we're talking about here?
Yeah, so Garvey is pretty tightly held by the General Assembly in terms of what we can use it for specific projects. The General Assembly, I believe it was 2023, authorized a new set of projects. I believe the Red Line and EV bus transition are party to that. I think where we need to assess is it's not free money. We still have to ultimately fund it from the state side at 20%. And then you need to assess of cost of that versus, our regular bonding mechanism, but we do have that opportunity as well. And I'll just say, I wanna give a shout out to the chair and anybody else that helped out, but when we do go forward for federal grants, having folks reach out to the federal delegation is invaluable, because then they know where not just where our priorities are of the administration, but where the priorities of our partners are as well. And the chair was doing a good bit of work reaching out to the senators and the congressional House member, Mr. Mfume, and his team leading up to the recent RAISE Award. So thank you.
I just wanted to return to, because you've hit on it several times already, kind of at the beginning, the budget process overall. And it might be part of the changes in transparency and accountability you're referring to. But it's certainly not unique to MTA or MDOT or Maryland. I mean, it happens everywhere in government budgeting. One, the 80-20, you only have the 20 match, but you still have to come up with it. But the key is right now, how do you feel about, or what is the status of, or how much transparency is there? And when you make this capital investment, really mapping it to what the operating dollar is gonna have to be in order to run it. And that, in such an infrastructure heavy, agency, is, I think, critical to our ability to advocate, in a meaningful way going forward.
Yeah, I mean, I undoubtedly we need to do it, and Holly is doing that in terms of her 10-year look at in terms of the operating growth. It's like, if the red line were to happen, which is gonna happen, we got to build that in now and think about it. When we think about our revenues, we need to index them for inflation. We have a decent path there, but if the economy is not growing, our assumptions that, we will be able to pay for it with existing resources is diminished, and then we're left with a delta. And we're in a position where we were last year of like, what can we afford and what should we prioritize? And so, getting the economy right is really important as well. Getting it, off the sluggish sidelines and fully into operations, not just good for, jobs and families, but also good for our ability to afford what we ultimately want to afford.
But zoning in on the delta, right? Because I mean, that's where my question is. The decision-making around the trade-offs of that delta, where does that live from a process perspective, would you say?
It lives at MDOT right now, right? And then, we are entrusted by the governor to make recommendations and advice to him. And working with our partners at the MODs, we articulate what we can and can't do. And then, the public gets to engage in the process as we put out drafts. Ideally, we can, open those doors a little bit earlier on and articulate, what it is that's happening. Because back to what I said earlier, it's like, ideally, if we only have a penny and folks want $1 billion, like, that's just not really helpful, so.
Okay, try and wrap up?
Yep, I'll just wrap up. I think, there's opportunities for engagement, and I understand, I'm hearing loud and clear, there's one for further engagement early and often, transparent and accountable way. I think, and that's where we want to be. So we'll work through what we can do.
Yeah, well, thanks, and thank you for acknowledging that. I mean, we're all on the same side here. We're just trying to figure out a process that makes sense for everybody. I wanted to make two other broader comments quickly. We've all saw this week, the governor said, I think, two very consequential things. One is he does not intend to raise taxes or fees. So it will be a challenge, of course, to figure out how to do all the things we're talking about, including the treasured red line without that. I'm sure the governor has a plan, because I know the governor is pro-transit, and I know he's committed to the red line, and I know he's committed to transit, all the things you said. So I'm confident that there's a plan, but it did catch my attention. So we'll have to, keep talking about that. And the other thing I would note for the record, depending on who saw it, is the governor did say there would not be cuts in transportation. He's moving some money around to some other priorities, which are totally legitimate priorities that all of us as Marylanders are concerned about. But he did say that there would not be cuts to transportation. So I'm obviously pleased to see that. And I guess, we now have to go through this process. I imagine if the governor said that MDOT is listening. and that there won't be cuts to transportation. So hopefully, the process will unfold accordingly. But Joe, thank you. I know this is, I'm sure this is not the easiest thing for you to sort of work through, but I understand that you and the department, that, it's a new paradigm, and, we're all, I think, working through it constructively and with kind of a team spirit. So I really, really, really appreciate what you and the department and MTA are doing. So thank you very much for being here. Any last questions? Because I want to move on to David. Anything else you want to?
No, I'll just say, thank you for the opportunity to be here today. To the last point on the red line, in all major projects, they almost die 1,000 cuts before they're ultimately done. And so we're at the early stages, and I think at this early juncture, having the support of this commission, our local leaders and partners, and the governor, is a recipe for success.
Yep.
Do we have, all of our I's dotted and T's crossed just yet? No. But I think the recipe, the right climate is there. And so I think, we look forward to working with this group and others to deliver it. I think the governor is a champion, has been since day one, and we look forward to working together.
The broad theme here, which people have heard me say, certainly department and the governor, is I process in part this commission's sort of statement as help us help you. Help us help you. We want to help. Let's figure out how to make the most of the opportunities we have together. So thanks very much. David, are you ready?
Sure.
Well, thank you, Chairman Maria, and good late morning or early afternoon, commissioners. It's my pleasure to be here. My name is David Zayden. I am chief at MDOT, running the Office of Real Estate and Economic Development, which is located in the Secretary's office at MDOT. I joined MDOT last April at the behest of Secretary McAndrew and Secretary Wiedefeld to help focus MDOT's resources on transit-oriented development. And as we'll discuss, it's a major priority for not only MDOT, but Governor Moore and the administration in helping drive transit ridership, getting more use out of our transit assets, preparing for new transit assets, and then also helping achieve some of the economic development and climate change and other goals that the state has. So pleasure to be talking to you about our efforts to this point today. To kind of put it as a starting point, transit-oriented development is defined in state law in the transportation article as dense mixed-use deliberately planned development within a half mile of transit stations that is designed to increase transit ridership. So I think there's some fundamental points just in that definition alone, which is TOD is deliberately planned. It's not an organic form of development. And if you look at successful TOD anywhere in any market, in any jurisdiction, there's always some role of the public sector bringing investment and support to making that happen. And then also fundamentally, TOD should increase transit ridership. That's really the ultimate benefit, and that's something that we're striving for. Additionally, in the recent released Moore-Miller 2024 state plan, the governor kind of took it a little bit further and framed transit-oriented development as a priority in meeting our housing challenges that the state and frankly the nation is facing in terms of available housing, affordable housing, and access to housing. But then also leveraging our infrastructure to bolster inclusive economic growth. TOD can help drive, connection to opportunity, connection to educational opportunities by allowing people the ability to live and work near transit and use that in their daily lives. So I think that's kind of the overall framing for where we're coming from. To talk about some of the opportunities and the challenges that we have statewide in achieving this. First, to start with the opportunities. We are a transit-rich state. We have diverse existing transit assets, including high-capacity transit assets that can be utilized for TOD, and that can help drive demand for TOD. This includes MTA with the diverse systems that exist now, but also the future Red Line East-West service, future SMRT. These are all going to provide opportunities to do TOD statewide. WMATA additionally is a driver of transit-oriented development in the state with their 26 stations in the state of Maryland. And as Assistant Secretary McAndrew mentioned, as a funder and a core partner to WMATA, we're also working with them to make sure we realize TOD in that area as well. More specifically, MDOT holds approximately 300 acres of undeveloped land adjacent to transit stations. This is predominantly along, within the Baltimore region, along the Baltimore Metro and light rail systems, but also along the Mark Penn line. Many of these sites are used for underutilized parking. And this is really where joint development comes in. Most transit operators and agencies that own these types of properties stand up a joint development program to develop these for transit-oriented development. And I think that's going to be a core part of our program in converting these sites that are really not providing any benefit or economic opportunity today to transit-oriented development. Also, within Baltimore, the existing transit assets and even the future transit assets serve communities that have been historically disinvested. This image here reflects the study done by Johns Hopkins, which is kind of framed as the black butterfly, as the disinvested communities of Baltimore, and these are served by our existing transit assets. So by pursuing TOD and bringing investment to these communities, we can help correct that history of disinvestment in these neighborhoods. And I think that's a core part of our work. And also this will help increase equitability of access to transit, that to help lead to access to jobs, housing opportunities, and educational opportunities. As I mentioned, housing is an important goal of our work. And I think as many of you know, over this past legislative session, there was the governor's housing package, which really identified that the state is deficient by 96,000 housing units. While housing is an important part of TUD, it's certainly not the only use that we look at, but we think this is a really critical driver to what we want to do. And to help pursue that, we are working very closely with DHCD as a core partner in bringing investment that can help drive housing development adjacent to transit. We've been coordinating with them and targeting transit adjacent sites for their programs. We've given them input on what's called the QAP, which helps direct their low-income housing tax credits to making sure that transit adjacent sites get priority. Their recent housing legislation, which is passed by the General Assembly, can help support additional density next to transit. And that's just starting to play out, and people are starting to understand how that's going to work. And then we are also working on future coordination with our joint development and even striking an MOU with DHCD to help codify how MDOT and DHCD can work together to bring housing investment to our transit-oriented development. So to get to the challenges, and I think these are some of the things that we were talking about in the previous conversation. There are certainly market challenges related to doing transit-oriented development in the Baltimore region. Baltimore has lost 6% of its population from 2010 to 2020. There are statewide economic challenges that present an impediment to investment. Maryland has not been competing very well on a national stage or in terms of our partners, in terms of GDP, employment growth, and other economic drivers. That impacts a wide range of sectors, but it also impacts real estate investment. And that's something that we're going to have to tackle in terms of getting the type of investment to achieve the type of TOD projects that will really have an impact. Additionally, the state as a partner is a challenge as well. We have a limited track record in doing transit-oriented development. There's only been 2 joint development agreements that have occurred in the state over the last 20 years. And when it comes to getting development partners and getting the quality type of partnerships that we need, that is a factor. So we'll be working on kind of getting our message out there and positioning ourselves and organizing ourselves to be better partners for our development colleagues. Also limited effectiveness of policy and funding support. And this kind of is embodied in the TOD designation policy that has been in the state since 2003, which I'll talk a little bit more of. So I think framing the state as a better partner and also really pushing forward in terms of policies that can help support good TOD is going to be a core part of our approach. Another challenge is local land use. In some of our initial analysis, there's a little bit of a misalignment between where we do have strong markets in the Baltimore region and what the local zoning allows. And there are varying paths throughout the region and frankly throughout the state on how to address that. Local zoning is the authority of the local jurisdiction, and many of the local jurisdictions have different processes to change that. There are cycles, there's community sentiment, and these are all things that need to happen with support of the local jurisdictions and through good dialogue. MDOT and MTA rely on close collaboration to align transit, housing, and economic development with local land use, and we look forward to further engagement on that issue.
Can I ask one question before you switch gears?
Sure.
Back to DHCD, you're saying that's kind of from a structural standpoint, that's a newer partnership to try and work together around that. So right now, you don't have any dedicated allocation of funds to TOD from any of their portfolio in terms of tax credits or funding. Is that accurate or?
Well, it's kind of a nuanced question. They have been placing their investment in transit adjacent developments. New Carrollton is actually a good example, where they have awarded a 9% housing tax credit deal there. But there is no, at the front end, they are unable to commit their money until frankly, a developer submits an application for a building. But we're getting to that. We want to signify to the development community that DHCD is prioritizing those types of applications so that once we get developer partners, they can feel good about the types of deals that they can get. And frankly, our Reisterstown project is a good example of that. DHCD has given, we've had meetings with them and they are interested in placing money at that project. It's just a matter of getting the application in and getting the details together.
Quick question, has the strategy evolved? I would imagine that employment partners were a large part of this equation. Post-pandemic, obviously, return to work dynamics are still in flux for a lot of folks. How has the lack of return toward influencer impacted the strategy? I'm even looking at the loss of population that coincides probably with a lot of migration out we saw during the pandemic and maybe even recover. So how do you guys think about that in terms of the mix that you guys have when you're looking at transit oriented? It may have relied heavily on employment factors before.
Sure. Well, I think there's a couple aspects to that. The fundamental piece is nobody's building office right now. So we're not going to be getting, TOD projects that have a large component of office development. I do think, and there may be some, but I think that's kind of office is not going to be a fundamental driver of real estate development in the short term. I do think though that TOD as in terms of the land uses are going to be reflective of kind of the nature of the changing of transit in general. Commuter rail as something where somebody gets on at the morning peak, goes to work and then comes home in the evening peak. Is changing. It's more about lifestyle transit in terms of being able to get on transit to go do daily errands and, go see your friends or go do entertainment. And I think that's going to be reflected in the land uses we're going to see at transit adjacent sites. So I think it's going to be more about those mix of uses and housing as opposed to just being like office.
I agree. I guess my question is more, how does that reality affect what you guys plan for? Or is there a massive effect? Because I agree with everything you just said, I agree. But what does that do to your assumptions and how difficult does that make what you ultimately have to do?
I'm gonna jump in real quick and just say, there's two things to think about, I think, that also are a factor here. Is one is interest rates, right? So unfortunately, we are developing now strategies that hopefully will net out once the market cools off, right? But there should still be some development, residential population is still growing, right? But I think the other side is the service patterns are changing, right? So it's not so much, and roughly 30% of the trips that are taken are for commute purposes anyway. So there's still a majority of the trip shed is not commute driven. So it's how do you capture that? And that's always been a little bit of a challenge, but it means that you have to have service at more hours of the day, more predictable, more reliable, but service is gold to answer, to drive the T and the TOD.
So when you talk about that, and you have to think about how you get more commuters because they're taking the short trips, I would assume that you're doing a different plan in terms of what you're offering at that point. Are you offering more local transit back and forth for people to, because you're not talking about morning and evening now, you're talking about people going to the store, people going to visit friends, so they're not going from Baltimore to DC more so now. So as I think about that, I think more of that with a light rail or more bus transit because it's shorter trips. Are you taking that into consideration as you look at that in the long term? Because that's more transit, not less at shorter intervals.
So, in terms of longer term planning, it depends on by mode. So starting on the MARC side, MARC growth and transformation plan is looking at where at market, like it's a market study that we've never done before, at where we think we can capture additional riders. A lot of it is midday, a lot of it is weekend. And identifying what changes would need to be made with our agreements with Amtrak and CSX to make that happen. Because that's unfortunate, we don't own the lines, right? So like I can't just make changes like some other agencies can. But we are looking at that. We're looking at adding midday service on the Brunswick line this fall. So we are scheduled to make that happen. On light rail, right now we're fairly constrained by the vehicles. Like we barely have enough vehicles to run the service we're currently running, but new vehicles would allow, and more operators would allow us to run 7-minute headways, would allow us to expand service on Sundays to align better with some of the shorter trips that people are making. Metro, similarly, vehicles are a concern, but as we get new vehicles, we can look at different service patterns and changing those things. On the bus side, we have made changes. So our bus schedules over the past 4 years have been adjusting to the changing demand. One of the things that we've seen is the PM peak. There is still a peak, like it's flattened out, but there is still a peak. It's shifted earlier. So instead of real heavy from like 3 to 7, it's now 2 to 6. So everyone's going home early. I'm not sure, but it's definitely earlier. And so we've shifted our service to match that. We've also shifted our service in the morning. We have basically the peaks have kind of expanded a little bit and it's a little bit flatter versus the huge jump up in the morning and huge jump up in the afternoon. So we are constantly looking and making adjustments on each of our modes.
I'm gonna hand it back to the chief in a second, but one way to also think about this is where we have investment today, that we will have investment for the next 99 years, right? So our rail lines are, as far as I'm aware, not going away, especially our subway line. And when we think about our subway line, we've got acres upon acres upon acres of state-owned land. We could think differently, and that's what we're doing at Reisterstown in terms of like thinking about how do you rethink the use and then ultimately market it in a way that can develop into something that's different. And that is transit supported, right? Putting people adjacent to, not everybody's gonna take transit, but it will net out some increase in ridership. It will create tax revenue. Dave has some data points on that, both for the jurisdiction, but also the state. And it will lower the need for folks to drive, which is good for our climate, right? So it's a not totally how are we solving for the transit ridership in the immediate near term, but also how are we creating those economies that are supportive of where I think we as a state value, as a jurisdiction value want to have.
Just a point, it may not seem as intuitive, but as you look at the mix of housing in the housing initiative, I think senior housing is an element. I hope that is being looked into as well. Oftentimes senior communities can be isolated from a lot of the amenities. And I think as our population demographics shift, you're gonna find probably more seniors are gonna be more apt to take public transit. Our generation is getting older, so that's something that I think that we need to, I'm hoping is being mixed into that strategy as well.
Yeah, there's actually a senior housing component to the Reisterstown project.
Similarly, I was wondering about your partnership, if any, with higher education, because as we're thinking about population growth, there is great need on the college and university level for housing. That's actually a place where they are booming. And so thinking about how do you work with them and their transportation needs to connect their students, faculty, and staff, where they need to go, where they need to live.
Yeah, completely agree. And I think they're gonna be core partners given they're going to be a driver of a lot of development in Baltimore. And I think initially, I'll talk a little bit about our Penn Line strategy, but Bowie State is a core partner in what we're doing there. So completely agree. So to talk about our strategy and how we're kind of organizing our approach, because as I said, we're a big state, we have a lot of different transit, we have a lot of different markets, we have a lot of different partners. And so we've kind of taken a kind of a two-pronged approach to advancing this. First is, we're in the process of standing up a joint development program where we're going to look at state-owned land, look at public land, and figure out a way to develop that as transit-oriented development and get the right development partners. And there's a lot of pre-planning work that goes into that and understanding the public infrastructure needs, getting our partnerships together, but that's that core approach. Additionally, we know we can't cover everything, and local jurisdictions have their own priorities, they kind of have their own plans as well. And so we want to be able to support them in what they're doing. So we're going to be standing up programs to support local jurisdiction efforts and priorities, and the TOD designation process and how we're revamping that is our first foray into that. So to talk about some initial, some of our first initiatives, from a joint development standpoint, we've decided to start with the Penn Line, which is a core transit route between the DC and Baltimore economic centers. You know, if you look at the investment that's happening on the Penn Line, which is also the Northeast Corridor, you see like what's happening in New Carrollton with WMATA and others. Amtrak's, you know, investing a lot of money at Baltimore Penn Station, although that project's had some trouble recently, but you know, that's a huge effort that's going to be really important to that corridor, as well as Washington Union Station. And so there's MARC stations on that corridor, and also land that we own. So that was kind of our first starting point for joint development. We've been working on a Penn Line TOD strategy with MTA and other core partners to develop a full TOD strategy and prioritization for that corridor. That'll be coming out later this summer. The first station to really come out for solicitation will be Odenton. But the initial analysis shows, just from that section alone, we could potentially see 2,800 housing units and generate over $785 million of state and local tax revenue. So I think you can start to put out that story about what realizing TOD in these areas can really start to achieve. And I think that's going to be a core deliverable. We're also looking at Baltimore Metro. We've talked about Reisterstown, which we see as a great starting point for some of our TOD work in Baltimore from a joint development standpoint. There's a long story there, but when the administration changed and we all came in to really focus this effort, we already had a developer partner there. But we wanted to really make that something that embodies good transit-oriented development. So we partnered with MTA, with Wabash Development, who's the developer partner there, as well as Baltimore City, to do this vision planning and really elevate the expectations for that project. And that vision plan is what came out in the last couple of weeks. But we're going to see over 800 housing units there of mostly multifamily, but also affordable and workforce housing, some senior housing, some home ownership opportunities. But that's going to be coupled with great retail, great commercial, and then also great connectivity. Wabash Avenue is a little bit of a barrier to pedestrian and safety and multimodal access, as well as Patterson and some of the other adjoining public spaces. And that was the inspiration for the RAISE grant that we submitted and were recently awarded for. So we're looking forward to advancing all of that work and seeing that project break ground. Additionally, along the Baltimore Metro, we're going to be pursuing Rogers Avenue. We're just starting to get started on this. And really the way this is going to work from a joint development standpoint is us doing preliminary work to understand our infrastructure requirements. You know, how much parking do we need? What's the infrastructure needed there? And then what are the development opportunities, and kind of getting ourselves organized so that we can go out to the development community and get a good development partner so that they know that we're really ready to partner with them. And then following through the next fiscal year, we'll be looking at other state-owned sites for joint development, primarily the ones that have zoning. Baltimore City has TOD zoning in many of the sites that we own, and that's really going to be where we're going to be focusing initially. I want to talk a little bit about public infrastructure, because housing obviously is a huge driver, and I think that's really important, and we're very excited about our DHCD opportunities. But really one of the major barriers and impediments to doing TOD is the public infrastructure, particularly parking. You know, we are going to develop underutilized parking spaces. We still got to provide replacement parking. Parking nowadays is super expensive, almost $30,000 a space, if not north of that. And so that would be a challenge in any market, but giving our market challenges, being able to finance that is going to be even more difficult. And so we don't want to just throw that onus on the private sector, because A, the market's not there to really support it, but B, we want them to focus on delivering great TOD, which is the density and the mix of uses and the things that we want to help drive development. So we've been working on exploring different tools on how to make that happen. Exploring different things such as TIF, special financing districts are going to be an important part of our strategy going forward, as well as Medco, who's been a core partner of ours on some of the work that we've been doing, but they're in the process of standing up an infrastructure bank. And they also have a lot more flexibility being a quasi development agency. So we're going to be partnering with them a lot more to help tackle these public infrastructure needs in order to make this happen, because this is going to be quite a challenge. Additionally, we did submit a grant application for the Build America Bureau's Innovative Financing Program, which was the first offering of that program, so that we can study and explore how we can go through third-party concessions to deliver this public infrastructure. You know, how can we rely on a third party that could more efficiently deliver a parking structure and operate and maintain it, so it can be outside of our capital requirements, but also can be done through a more effective arrangement. So we're hoping we get a favorable ruling on that grant later this year. So to talk about the Equitable and Inclusive TOD Enhancement Act, this legislation was passed in the 2023 legislative session, and this really provides an opportunity to redefine the TOD designations and create that as a program to support local jurisdictions in doing TOD. The TOD designation historically has been around since 2003. There are 14 TOD designated sites in the state. Many of them have not seen significant development, and there's really no kind of action or agenda to help move those along as TODs. And so we want to use this as an opportunity to rethink that and create the TOD designations as a program to support local jurisdictions who have that intentionality to move TOD forward. Because along with that, we now have the MDOT TOD Capital Grant and Revolving Loan Fund. So there's going to be money behind the TOD designations, whereby if there's a TOD designated site that has a plan for what they want to do TOD wise there, the local zoning and land use is in place, they can apply to MDOT to receive grant funding or finance help to help move that TOD program forward. So we're in the process of standing that up now, and that will be announced within the next couple months as an RFI to get information from the local jurisdictions, and then we'll look at providing the grant funding for opportunity later on this year in the fall.
So let me are you all looking at changing the TOD, the 14 that you currently have out there?
No.
The difference, or you're not looking to change them?
No, they're grandfathered in. They'll still be TOD designations. In order for them to access the fund though, we'll need a little bit more information from them on how they're advancing TOD and what the kind of plan is, but they will still be TOD designated sites. So to talk about some other initiatives, as Joe mentioned, MDOT, MTA, Baltimore City, and Baltimore County are submitting for a TOD planning grant for the Red Line corridor. This would be a high-level TOD strategy for that entire corridor along the Red Line. That grant application will be going in July 22nd. So we are very thankful for the partnership with Baltimore City and Baltimore County on that, and we're looking forward to getting that application in and winning it. Kind of outside of the region here, we are supporting the Purple Line Corridor Coalition for their TOD planning grant application for the Purple Line Corridor. This will be their third application for funding. They've already received 2 grants, and so they've been quite successful there, and we're happy to support them along with MTA. Additionally, just to mention, MDOT is partnering with WMATA in their joint development efforts. As the discussion illuminated prior to this, we are a funder of WMATA and we're a partner to them, and their joint development in Maryland stations brings real economic potential for the state. In their analysis, just by finishing out their JD program at their stations could realize $2.3 billion in economic development for the state itself. So I think that really shows kind of the power of the work that they're doing, and that we hope to match in our efforts. That's the end of my presentation. Happy to entertain any questions you may have. Discussion.
Are there any additional questions? Yes.
I have one quick clarification. You said it at the beginning. This is a new office, correct?
The office that it's a pre-existing office. We're just kind of refocusing it on TOD.
Okay, thank you.
It's funny you asked that question, because I was about to say, first of all, David, thank you for doing this. David is a great choice. David, why don't you just do 30 seconds on your own background, if you don't mind?
Sure, I guess in terms of my professional path, TOD has been the core of my work. I was at Amtrak when we started the major stations group, and standing that up, which has resulted in the Union Station, Baltimore Penn Station, Philadelphia 30th Street, Chicago Union Station, et cetera. Those projects, that was great experience. After that, I was consulting on TOD and transit projects around the country. As a matter of fact, the week before I started at MDOT, I was down in Atlanta working with MARTA on the Bankhead TOD project. But this is a passion of mine, and I'm really excited to be here and help achieve this.
So I just want to say, I mean, so David is really well suited to do this job. A number of us worked on TOD 1.0 in the administration prior to the prior administration. Prior to the prior administration. And I think we really laid a strong foundation, and including some of the earlier versions of the designation process and so on. I was frankly quite surprised that in 8 years of the prior administration, really nothing happened, because the opportunities were sort of evident. And this is such, it's not low hanging fruit in that it's easy, but it's low hanging fruit in that it's obvious that this needs, there's so much potential here. So I'm really, really excited to have a skilled person and a focus. We make these other legislative changes. The TOD designation process, the integration of DHCD in particular, with other sister agencies, is really, I think, making a big difference. The reconfiguration of Smart Growth Subcabinet. There are a lot of things that have sort of happened. And I was joking with David and with Joe about there was a headline that said, MDOT wants to do housing in Rice Town Road Plaza. And it's like, think about that headline, right? That's pretty game changing. So MDOT wants to do housing, but recognizing that it's holistic, and then also adding to it the fact that there's all this value capture opportunity in the TIFs and the other things where you can create economic development, you can create activity, you can do things that are going to benefit local jurisdictions overall. I mean, it's just a win-win kind of situation. Again, it's not to say it's easy, but so I really wanted the commission to hear about this. I'm not suggesting that the local reps here are your point of contact in local jurisdictions. I suppose you have others, but we do have local reps in the relevant jurisdictions. Please keep us and them informed about what's going on. And if we can be helpful to you in promoting this, the time will come in the next session where you need additional legislative action that's appropriate for us to be involved with, at least as it relates to our catchment area, if you will, in Greater Baltimore. And keep us apprised. I'd like to hear more about the results of the two studies and specific plans and intentions with regard to these sites. So it's really gratifying to see this back in action. And it's funny your question, Lakey, because the answer is this office has been there, but it ain't been doing this. And the time has come. So thank you, David.
Thank you.
Yes, Joe.
Just in the immediate near term, I don't know if you've approached the commission for a letter of support for that TOD planning grant.
That may have come across, but I'll make sure.
Yeah, we're always happy to do those kinds of things, and if it helps, it
That's
helps.
something that we've done at the commission, but.
Yeah, no, it's totally appropriate, and we'll make those, we'll triage as we can. Okay.
Appreciate that.
Yeah, thanks, David. Okay, so Don, we've got hopefully enough time. We've got about half an hour to get through the remaining items on the agenda, many of which relate to your presentation, updates, and organization. So please, take it away.
Okay. Last month, we talked about the working groups. We divided ourselves into three different groups. We polled the members to see what they'd like to do. We got, most folks were able to respond. For those that haven't, we have taken the liberty to assign you to a group. But we're going to be talking about three different groups. So staffing, a ridership experience group, and a project planning and development group. The project planning and development work group, first one to look at, we have been working at staff level to develop small work programs for the upcoming year for each of these groups. So initially, The project and program delivery work group will look at procurement issues, property management, how MTA handles their right-of-way and properties and how they acquire and dispose, streamlining approvals, looking at their processes in there, and then they'll develop a report at the end of the at the end to kind of document this. The staffing work group, we intend to look at the salary structure, their benchmark some models and look at some legislative administrative process issues that we could perhaps influence. This is basically going to help them by updating the 2022 salary and staffing report that they did and gave to the General Assembly back, I guess in 2023, 2021. And the last group, the ridership experience group, actually got the most interest from the members that we heard from. This will look at understanding some of the current experience of the riders, identifying some of the challenges we're hear about some of their stories, and try to develop some recommendations and strategies to address some of these issues and to monitor things like their performance evaluation and their service changes are in the legislative mandate for the commission. We try to break it down to about 5 members per group. Obviously we have enough members to do that. So what we're going to be doing is reaching out to you in the meantime to initiate the conversation individually with the work groups. So you'll be getting from me some material and an invitation to come talk about these things. We'll try to make this easy on you as we can. We're going to try to do these virtually because I know it's often harder to get everybody together in group. So that's the work.
Thanks. Thanks, Don, for your hard work and the team's staff's hard work in sort of organizing all this. The idea of these work groups, as you can sort of see from these slides, is to have a fairly broad scope, potentially, but with some very specific tasks now. That doesn't mean that the work groups can't look at other things, but it's sort of at minimum do this, and then we'll sort of see where it goes. That's designed in part to we have a December I forget it's the first, maybe December statutory report that's due. That also obviously coincides with the imminent arrival of legislative session. It is possible that things that we're recommending might require legislative action. If not, the General Assembly session is a good time to inject these kinds of issues into the sort of the discussion, even if they don't require specific legislation. So we have several months, which I'm confident is enough time to sort of get organized and to make specific recommendations. We will adjust or tweak or expand or whatever we want to do these work groups as we go. But this is a very good place to start. So I know it's additional time, but hopefully we can make it, with virtual participation and with good staffing, which we certainly have. MTA, of course, will be helpful, support, will supply information and participate as necessary. So that's kind of the overall thinking. The other thing I want to say very, very quickly is there is no specific budget group because, as I said in a prior meeting, it's just that needs to stick for now with this entire commission. Considering what we just talked about, and it drives everything. And I don't know that all of this stuff is informed by how well the budget is working, what kind of funds they have. So there will necessarily in each of these cases be implications. We're not doing, MTA can't do this because it doesn't have the funds, et cetera, and that will bubble back up into a larger budget discussion. But we thought about whether we should have a group like focused on the MTA budget. I think we just concluded it's too cross-cutting and overarching, and we would just not do that, and we would instead focus here and sort of see what happens in the Venn diagram version of this. So very happy to get these rolling. I want to charge everybody to be focused on them. and to be mindful of the fact that we are trying to make, trying to answer the specific questions, and anything else, we can start to develop to-do lists within this sort of this kind of third, fourth quarter period that we're entering to anticipation of our report. Questions? Great, thank you very much. I'm really excited, for us, and I think we've been building to this over the last, whatever it's been, 3, 4, 5 months of this. I thought the budget discussion today was great in terms of just thinking about the issues, and now each of you can dig into an area that is of interest to you and make some specific recommendations to help the system improve. And we're not, I meant to say at the beginning, the intent here is not to micromanage MTA. It is not possible, it's not our charge, we're not gonna do that. But we need to know enough about MTA's operations and identify issues in order for us to make recommendations. And I'm confident we'll be able to strike the balance. Okay?
Very good, thank you.
Yep.
So look forward to hearing from you all on this and working with you on this. So the next item in on the information items is the authority study. And just a brief update on that is that we have contracted with Nelson Nygaard, who we worked with through the regional governance, transit governance funding work groups. They have that background to build upon, to look at try to refine the recommendation for regional transit authority for the region. We have our kickoff meeting today, this afternoon. We intend to have them initiate their work, develop a final work program, and we'll be routinely reporting to the commission activities. And at certain milestones, expect to have a consultant come provide a formal briefing to you. Right. Any questions?
Yeah, questions for Don? Anxious to get that rolling, and it sounds like we're in a good shape.
We have a public participation. All here, and I don't.
Ashley, is there anybody wanting to address the commission who's online or here present?
I see one hand up.
Dan? There he is. Are we unmute, Dan?
Okay, I'm unmuted.
Oh, there you go.
Okay, I just wanted to make three points, brief points, hopefully. One is that this commission, I think, should be aware of and maybe try to institute some dialogue with the DMV Moves Task Force. This is a joint effort between WMATA and the Greater Washington Council of Governments. And they're looking at a wide range of transit issues, including funding, which would directly affect and impact things that are going on in Maryland. Some of the earlier budgeting things we were talking about. So I think that it would be really useful for this group to have some sort of dialogue and or conversation and or presentation about where that group stands. So that's the first point. The second point is I'd like to see more discussion of long-term planning issues, specifically Trade Point Atlantic, which is one which, of course, we've been talking about Red Line for a long time, but the world keeps moving on. Trade Point Atlantic is a huge, huge project with employment issues and mostly employment of the logistics type, which is to say people that could really use mass transit. And so far, there's not been much discussion of the of incorporating mass transit into the early planning stages of further development of Trade Point Atlantic. A sub-point of that is I hope this group addresses the issue of the Key Bridge rebuilding and to get the input early on that we would like to see provision for rail transit on the replacement of the Key Bridge. And I think this group could be a really strong advocate to make sure that that is incorporated and does not get lost in the sauce of the budget process of the redevelopment of the Key Bridge. So that's just a sub point. Just a minor point, well, maybe not so minor. I don't know if people saw the story of the Hawaii lawsuit by the youth of Hawaii, a youth group, challenging the state's transportation planning, that it wasn't sufficiently environmentally friendly, and actually coming up with a settlement with the state along those lines. And I just suggest that in the line of this presents a really interesting and useful opportunity for outreach for MTA, to get a much more engaged type of youth outreach going on, where people are actually thinking about like what their needs are going to be as adults, and even getting into some things about how things are funded. So I'm just encouraging more effort towards getting people that are not my age involved in this process at every stage. So those are my 3 points, and thanks.
Thanks very much, and thanks for participating today. We appreciate it.
One thing I want to note, I think I mentioned this to the commission, we did kick off a youth transit commission this year for that reason, to plan for the needs of today and into the future. They met January through May was their last meeting, and they're going to kick off again in the fall. We're going to be engaging them. We're looking at a rider code of conduct, and that's one thing that I to them is to like, hey, what are some thoughts and feedback on this, to giving them some feel to do.
Anybody else? Ashley, Jake, anybody else? Anybody in the room? Okay. All right. Other business. Does any other commissioner have anything they want to raise for the benefit of the group? Going once, twice, hearing none. If you have something, Don?
I do, just that we have rescheduled tours coming up. And if you're interested, please get a hold of us. There are 2 dates we have, that's July 17th and July 31st. So if you're interested and able, love to have you.
Okay. Anything else?
One thing I will add on tours, so this is a couple of our facilities, Perk Bus and our Operations Control Center. Later this fall for the Metro rail car replacement and signal system project, we're going to be shutting down the shutting down the entire system for weekends. I think it'd be a good opportunity to kind of bring you guys down in the tunnel and see some of the challenges that we have. And it's just a cool thing to see, and not a lot of folks do that. So putting on your radar, that's something I'd like to plan for, and so we'll make sure we're coordinating.
Yeah, just let us know when the opportunity arises. Okay.
Or with MTA.
Yes.
Just one more thing, just responding to Dan's comments that related to Trade Point. I have to kind of say something on that. Being from Trade Point Atlantic, I do appreciate the commentary and indeed the acknowledgement of the significance of the project and the type of jobs that are there. We are working very closely with Baltimore County and MTA to figure out how to make the current existing system there work a little more efficiently. Just when a MTA bus comes to Trade Point, it takes 40 minutes just to get through the site, just because of the mass of stops that's there and the terrain that's traversing. So we're working with Baltimore County to see if there's a local component that can be added in to help save that time a little bit. And then also from the red line perspective, I think there's a conversation around maybe a BRT kind of solution down the road that could, complement what's going to happen at Bayview. So we're monitoring and tracking that, and that's something that is near and dear to our hearts as we continue to expand our project. And there is a project underway right now that a study will be released at the end of the week, meeting next week. That will project 8,000 additional jobs happening there as a result of the new port that we're building. So that's just a whole nother element there. You talk about the transit connectivity. So
I was just going to ask you what the employment numbers are like. Where are we today? Do you know offhand? Sorry.
There's about 13,000 direct jobs, 20,000 people a day in and out of Trade Point doing business at some level. And we expect that to grow significantly. will probably at full build out be closer to 25 to 26,000 people.
It's extraordinary.
Yeah, and I do wanna, commend Aaron and TradePoint, have been fantastic partners, letting us know when things are gonna be happening, connecting with employers so that we can align buses with shift changes. They've built us bus stops and great locations over there, and so I think it's been a good partnership. Obviously, there's more to do as it continues to grow. We pack those 60-foot buses, but I think it's a great partnership. We joke sometimes that our director of field supervision lives over there. He may have an office over with Aaron, but it's been a good partnership so far.
Very much.
We love partnerships. Okay, anything else going once? Okay. Todd, thank you for all your good work, staff, we really appreciate it, lots going on. Thank you, commissioners, for your attention through the summer and for those taking the time both to be here and to join. And if nothing else, I'll take a motion to adjourn.
Second.
All right, we're adjourned. Thank you very much.